Welcome to the Lessons from Leaders Show. I'm your host, Brian Beckham. My next guest is Caren Kenney. Caren is the CEO and founder of Evolve Leadership, which is a really, really cool and innovative coaching company that provides holistic coaching, mainly to C-suite, executive, high-level athletes, high-level military folks, people like that. The neat thing about Caren's business, as you'll hear, is she doesn't focus just on how you meet your numbers every quarter or how you get a little more efficient, going through your task list. She focuses on mental health, physical health, psychological health, spiritual health. They also talk a lot about how to be more efficient and get through your task list and things like that, but it's a much more holistic approach. Even more important, Caren's just a super, super fun and smart lady to talk to. I had a great time talking to her, and I think you'll really get a lot out of this episode, whether you're into coaching or not. Caren has a lot of really, really innovative ideas, and she's just a great person. And now I give you Caren Kenney. Hey, everybody, Brian Beckham here, and I've got Caren Kenney. Caren is an executive coach, and when I say executive coach, she is way, way more than that. The cool thing about what Caren is doing, and one of the reasons that I wanted to get her on the podcast, is because unlike a lot of executive coaches that we hear about, she takes a holistic approach. So it's not just about who can make the numbers every month, who can make the numbers every quarter, but it's teaching people in leadership positions how to be holistic leaders. So Caren, first of all, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate you agreeing to come on the show. Tell everybody a little bit about where you come from, how you got into what you're doing, and kind of what the approach is for your executive coaching company.
Sure. Thanks, Brian. It is great to be here with you today. I have not had a traditional career trajectory. I actually originally started out in high tech for 10 years, but kind of developed a bit of an entrepreneurial spirit and co-founded some companies, had my own company at one point, but I actually have built on my passions throughout my career. So some of my life experiences have really driven my career, ones which ultimately led me to where I am today. But started out with, I was married to a husband who's an executive who struggled with mental health issues. It got increasingly worse over time. This was back in the 80s and 90s, and there was not a lot of help available. There was a lot of stigma associated with it. And so he'd maybe go in once a month for a 5-minute session and get a prescription, and everything was fine according to him and the doctor. But we watched him deteriorate over time. Ultimately, years later, he passed away. Did not take his life, but passed away from lack of self-care and paranoia and just struggles associated with his awful mental health challenges. So I co-founded a company with psychologist, Rich Bedrosian, focused on developing digital health coaching programs for people with mental health issues. So everything from depression, grief, anxiety, stress, insomnia, recognizing that there was not enough help out there for people who are struggling, that there was stigma. People were not seeking help, especially men during that time. So this was something that could be available to anyone, anywhere, globally. Ultimately, our programs got acquired into Johnson & Johnson, who was a client using ours and other digital health coaching programs. So I helped launch the health and wellness business for J&J. This was back in 2008, which was great. 8 weeks later, we acquired the Human Performance Institute, which was based in Orlando. And they originally were focused on sport, elite athletes, some of the top athletes in the world, added on surgeons, military, special forces, hostage rescue teams, basically anybody who had to sustain high performance in very stressful environments. Like you could not have a bad day. So we were all part of this health and wellness business. About 6 years ago, I moved directly into the Institute as part of the leadership team and created this program focused on whole person, whole life training for the C-suite. And then J&J closed the commercial business, so still offers training of the Institute to its own leaders, but closed off externally. And so I founded this business a couple of years ago called Evolve, focused on delivering this same type of training. So we have coaches all over the world who take this holistic approach. And when I say holistic, we're not focusing directly or just on leadership competencies and skills. We're looking at areas like physical well-being, mental and emotional resilience. We recognize that leaders are human beings with multiple dimensions. So the physical, the biological, the mental, the emotional. So we look at training them holistically. And then we also look at creating this ecosystem of support. So we will also train their family members, their administrative assistant, a peer ecosystem in their company. So the idea is we need to prepare people differently and provide a greater kind of system or ecosystem of support. So that's a kind of a long story for how I got to where I am today. And yes, I became a coach, recognizing that at one point I was interested in therapy, but then I realized therapy is really about getting people from struggling to functioning. Coaching is really about getting people from functioning to optimal. And I found that my passion was greater there. I had worked in business for years, worked with leaders, a lot of CEOs, and saw that they worked so hard to get to where they were. And then one thing, whether it was a health issue or something that they said, or just being exhausted or burnt out, could take down not only their career, but their company, their relationships. So I just saw an opportunity, but really it was all fueled by my husband and life experiences. So that was kind of a gift he gave to me because I love what we're doing.
Yeah, and we were talking right before the show, Caren, and one of the things I love about this topic is I've been through some mental health issues myself personally. So about 10 years ago, and I've talked about this publicly quite a bit, I started having panic attacks out of nowhere. And for people that are listening to this show who have had a panic attack, you'll know what I'm about to say. But for those of you who haven't had a panic attack, it feels like you're going to die. Like it literally feels like you're dying. And I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy. But I was under a tremendous amount of stress at the time. I had young kids. I remember actually my first panic attack. I had a boy who was 4, a daughter, or a boy who was 2, a boy who was 4, and my wife was 8.5 months pregnant with my first daughter. And I was getting ready to go out of town for 2 months to be in a big trial. And I was sitting around on a Sunday afternoon, and all of a sudden my hand started tingling. I thought I was having a stroke. I called my father-in-law, come watch the boys, went straight to the emergency room. They did every test known to mankind. And they said, nothing wrong with you. And then the doctor said, you got any stress in your life? And I said, well, I'm about to have my first daughter, about to be out of town for 2 months. He goes, you had a panic attack. That's what happened. And it was terrible. But I started having panic attacks about having panic attacks. So it became like this loop. And like a dumb man, I decided not to go seek help. I just decided to figure this out on my own. I ended up finding meditation, which has been a complete game changer for me. But one of the things it did, Caren, was I think particularly men, but also women, will poo-poo mental health, PTSD. There's been this attitude historically, you need to just suck it up and figure it out. After having gone through that personally, it completely changed my view of that. I think not only is PTSD and mental health real and important, but in many ways it's more important than your physical health because it can cause problems with your physical health. So talk a little bit about why it is that you've added, because when I think of an executive coach, I think of somebody that is teaching you how to meet your numbers, is teaching you how to work and be more efficient, maybe giving you some tips here and there, but you got a much bigger program than that. So talk a little bit in more detail about why it is that you have this comprehensive approach to executive leadership.
Sure. I do want to first just thank you for sharing about your panic attacks. I know that's incredibly painful to go through. I have a daughter who struggled with those for a while and witnessed her. We were on a plane and she thought she was dying, and we called for medical attention, and it was horrible. And she too has learned strategies for dealing with them. But I think one thing that we can all do, especially people with a platform like you, is talk about challenges that we have with mental health. It's no different than physical health. It's part of who we are. And we have so many people suffering silently and not talking about it or not seeking help because they think they're alone or they're not strong enough. And the more people talk about it, because there's not one person listening today or that we all know who either themselves or have someone in their family who does or will struggle. And if we don't start talking about it, we're not going to solve the issue. So thank you for sharing that. And in terms of the training, you're right. We recognize the impact on mental well-being and physical well-being with leadership. So, and most coaching out there, executive coaching, is focused on skills and competencies, and it is very important coaching. And we do that as well. It's just, we felt that it fell short because, as you said, your mental health, your emotions, your thinking impact your decisions and your behavior. So if you're struggling, whether it's with depression or anxiety, or you're not sleeping well, if you're feeling, your stress response is not serving you well, all those things are going to impact your success as a leader. You're not going to make good decisions. If you're overwhelmed, if you are feeling fearful, you may cut corners or make decisions that could impact you negatively and your company negatively. Burnout and stress. Deloitte issued a study or released a study back in June, I think it was, that said 70% of the C-suite are contemplating leaving their jobs.
70%?
70%.
Wow.
Because they're not sure it's worth the impact on their mental well-being, well, right?
Yeah.
So what trade-offs are we making? And then it concerns me, even if you look at the political system, right? There are, I don't want to get into politics at all, but there are so many good people that don't run for politics or would not run for president because
100%,
it's worth it.
100%.
Yeah.
No,
So
let's get into that. I want to get into that because that's basically the whole point of my podcast, is to feature people that are leaders, but that you maybe don't hear as much about because they don't want to get out in this cesspool, which has become modern politics. Whatever side you're on, I know tons of great people that wouldn't touch politics with a 100-meter pole because it's a cesspool right now.
It is. Honestly, I wish we had no parties or a third party. I would love to see to mix it up.
Me too.
Because the blind loyalty and the just, both sides. So anyway, and so that's the thing. You don't have good people running for politics because they say it's not worth it. But for the first time, we're starting to hear that in business. Before, people, you wanted to be at the top or you wanted to continue to grow in that organization. So now if leaders saying, I don't know if it's worth the impact on me. I don't know if it's worth the impact on my family. I'm getting it at all sides. If you're leading a company, you're getting it internally from your employees, or getting it, and you have to be all things to all people. You have to take a stance on social issues, environmental issues, political issues. So the stress that we put leaders under, the stress that the board puts leaders under, is like, we're all responsible. But so if you're hearing people saying, I don't want to do this, then we lose great leaders. And so then who's leading our companies? And so this is an issue, I think, for all of us. But in terms of, so that's why we said, we know mental and emotional impacts your success as a leader. You cannot sustain, just as an athlete can't sustain. The Institute, years ago, when it just started with athletes, never picked up a racket or a piece of equipment. It was, what are the stories in your head? What is your purpose? What are you playing for? Are you going for the gold medal? Are you going for the achievement, or are you going for the impact that you're going to make? And then, what you put in your body, how you treat your body during the day is going to impact how you play, how you perform. Well, that's the same with leaders. And then emotionally, the stories that we tell each other, if we're not emotionally strong and able to create positive stories, and we all have this private voice that works against us and tells us if we're good enough or not, or this private voice and coach, you have to work with that person. So you have to work with this individual holistically. But yes, in terms of how it works, we start with deep assessment. So we do assessments on energy, well-being, and resilience and character. We look at all these components of who people are. We do a physical assessment. So we'll put them through an executive health assessment, like a one-day assessment. So you get kind of what's going on, what are the areas of vulnerability in all areas of dimensions of who you are that might need to be shored up. We'll do stakeholder feedback. And so we won't just interview people that you work with, we'll interview a significant other, a spouse, or a family member, because
Yeah.
you're not getting the whole picture. You can be like killing it at work, but at home, everything's falling apart. You get out of work, you plop down, you grab a drink, and you're irritable and don't bother me. So,
That sounds familiar.
right? Because you can't go nonstop all day, and then
Yeah.
you break at some point. So we teach strategic recovery and oscillation so that you can maintain energy levels throughout the day and renew that energy, where we're used to going linear, hard and strong until we kind of drop down. We get irritable, angry, frustrated, and then, we pick ourselves back up. Well, you don't have to get to that level, but it requires training. So the idea is we look at the person, we assess them in all these different ways, we get the feedback, we work with the client. There's a firewall of confidentiality, because guess what? When we do the executive health assessment, there is a mental health assessment component. We want them to tell us about what's going on in their life. If they're having panic attacks, a number of people have children who are struggling with mental health issues or substance issues. They're caring for aging parents. They're going through issues in their relationships. So by them telling us everything, we can then figure out where do we need to focus with that individual. And no one at the company knows. So whereas with traditional executive coaching, you'll report back to the board or the CEO if you're or a leader if you're coaching at a different level, how they're doing, what you're working on, where their areas of vulnerability are. We share nothing, and we make that very clear up front, because we want them to be very open and vulnerable, and then we'll address those issues. And so that's where we take that holistic approach individually, but then we interview the family, how is that person, as I said, doing at home? And we create this ecosystem of support. So we don't just train the leader, we'll train family members, we'll train the executive assistant who controls your life, right? If you have an assistant, schedule all your meetings so that they know to build in breaks, so that they know to create boundaries. And then we'll train peers around them at work. So the idea is, if you try to change something, if you have a family or you have friends and you're the only one doing it, whether it's eating better or, it's not going to happen. But if everyone around you is playing for the same game and we're elevating their performance, you're all in it together, it's going to make a big difference. So that's kind of the purpose behind it.
Yeah. And that last thing you said, that's part of the notion, which I think is absolutely true, that you're basically the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, give or take. And I've seen that in my own life a lot recently. So just to give you one example, I started jujitsu at 47. I turned 50 yesterday. And
Happy birthday.
Thank you. And I've found that once I started, so the jujitsu community is a bunch of people that are really interested in health and fitness and living a certain type of lifestyle. And you just can't, when you're in that community, you just start behaving in those ways. So I've become I've always been focused on my health and nutrition and exercise, but I've been focused on it even more because the people that I spend a lot of time with are focused on it. And it's just like you say, if you're spending time with people, if you want to change your diet and eat a certain way and you're spending time with a bunch of people that are eating junk food constantly, it's going to be next to impossible to do what you're doing. But I'll tell you what I want to do, Caren, if it's okay. I want to switch just a little bit and talk about the idea of coaching for executives to begin with. So, and I was one of these people. There are people that will say, hey, I've been a successful lawyer for 22 years, run a business, or I've been a CEO of a bank, or I've been a business owner, or an entrepreneur. Why do I need to listen to somebody that's not in my industry? Why do I need a coach? And I'll tell you, my experience, Caren, was I got a coach about 4 years ago, and literally on the first coaching call I had with him, I cried because we talked about some very personal things.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a tremendous, I had this coach for 2 years. We talked twice a month for an hour, and he gave me so much wisdom and so much insight. It was incredible. And I think one of the reasons it's good for people like me, I own my business and I'm the boss. And so I don't really have anybody telling me, hey, you need to watch out for this or watch out for this, or maybe you could do this a little bit better. And so I get a little nervous sometimes because I don't have the same feedback that people that aren't the boss get. So one of the reasons I think coaching is good is because you get an independent perspective from somebody who can be like, hey, Brian, you need to stop staying up till 2 a.m. and sleeping until you need to get better sleep, or you need to change your diet or whatever. But talk about, like, why would somebody that's already successful, somebody that's already in a good position, need a coach?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one is your coach isn't really telling you what to do. Your coach is helping you figure out. So I think a really good coach isn't, telling you what to do. They're helping you figure out how to
That's a great way
apply
to put it, by the way.
performance and continue on, like teach them to fish, right?
Yeah,
Um,
that's a great way to put it. The coach that I had was exactly that way. Like, he would just basically guide me through questions to a conclusion that I would feel like I was making on my own, you know?
Well, and it's just asking the right question. So
Yeah.
you have the answers. It's just you don't necessarily know the process to get to the answers, nor do you often take the time because you're getting it all done. So a coach makes you be intentional. It helps you create awareness about yourself, your others, your impact on others. And so you carve out that time, and they're also a thought partner. So part of it's asking questions, yes, but it's also someone you can brainstorm with in a safe way. To have this problem within the organization, and I haven't figured out how to deal with it, or an individual, or this is what's happening when I get home. So the coach gives you a third party, an unbiased perspective. They don't have any skin in the game in a particular area. You're not working with them, for them. You're not married to them, whatever it is. But yeah, they can ask the right question, and they teach you a process to continue to coach their self. I think for my clients, we should not be going on forever, right? They should get to a point where they've learned how to ask themselves the right questions. They've learned how to coach that private voice. So I'll have clients who, it might be from their upbringing where they can still hear a father or a parent criticizing them, or it's never enough. And they're, 50, 60 years old, and they're still struggling with that voice, even if that parent's still not around, and they're still trying to impress them, or had something happen in their life. So part of it is getting past that. Again, it's not therapy, it's training them to look at the inputs and maybe the stories that they have wrong about themselves or others, or how to deal with certain situations. So they develop a toolkit. So you're basically helping them create their own toolkit and how to respond to certain things that aren't serving them well. And then teaching them you've got to continue to up your game, right? No matter what you're doing, the number is going to be higher next year. You're not going to be told, oh, you can do less. Just chill out next year. We're going to take a little off your plate. Life's going to get harder. People come in and out of your life. People die. You get older. At some point, you might have a physical health diagnosis. The idea is, how do you train to continually take on more? So you learn how to push and then pull back, build capacity, push, oscillate. You might take on a really difficult meeting, and then you want to make sure you have a break there. Take on a difficult new job, but how are you building in recovery? So it's all about strategic recovery. Once you learn the skills, then you'll be able to apply them in different areas of your life. So that's where I think people had this perception. And I'll tell you one thing, we have had companies come in and say, I want you to train our leadership team. The CEO says, I want all the leaders to be trained. Well, some of them are going to think that's great. Some of them might be like, why do I need a coach? Or
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
I've had boards come to me and say, we've got this new CEO and we want to give him a coach. So, he or she is successful. Does that person want to coach? Because if they aren't motivated, like you were reluctant. Some people say, well, they're trying to fix me, or they don't think I'm good enough, and so they're not going to be as open. You might get them there, but the best clients are the ones who say, I want to be better, because we can always be better. Look at the athletes. Every year you have to set the number higher if you want to.
That's what I was about to say. Look at every single high level athlete. Name one high level athlete in any sport ever that doesn't have a good coach. Every single athlete has a good coach. And, so I'm one of the sports I like is golf, and Tiger Woods, the second best golfer in history. By the way, there's going to be people that are mad at me for saying that. Jack Nicklaus is the best ever because he's won 19 majors. Tiger's number 2. But anyway, the second best golfer in history had a golf coach.
Yeah.
And guess what? That golf coach could not beat Tiger in golf. He was not as good at golf as Tiger was, but he was a way better coach. Like, coaching is a totally one thing I figured out being involved in sports a lot is the skills that are required to be a good coach are not the same skills that are required to be good at that sport. Like, you can be a great coach and not be a great golfer, and you can be a great golfer and be a terrible, terrible coach. Let me ask you this question. What is it? What are like the two or three things that you see most commonly that C-suite people and people in leadership positions have trouble with? Like, is it the mental health issue? Is it sleeping issue? Is it the physical issue? Is it the stress issue? What are the two or three things you see most commonly, and what are the two or three really good bits of advice that you give people about those things?
That's a great question. I think in terms of the biggest areas is certainly burnout is an issue. You just mentioned golf, and think about golf and tennis, and you have a very short period of time in between each. Especially think about tennis. You have 16 seconds basically in between each shot.
Yeah.
So you have to reset yourself in 16 seconds in every dimension. You have to emotionally reset yourself. You have to physically take a few breaths, right? You have to forget that last point, especially if you lost it. And you have to reset yourself mentally, physically, emotionally. The same thing goes for leadership. Is you're going to take hits all the time. So the higher level leaders, you have, if you're a global company, you have problems all over the world, and you can't anticipate what's going to happen. You can anticipate sometimes things that might happen, but you can't prepare for everything as a leader. As a human being, we can't, but especially as a leader. So what you do need to do is prepare for anything that could come up. And the way you do that is you learn how to respond to situations, right? And we start foundationally with purpose. Getting leaders connected to a personal purpose is the number one thing that we do.
Love
and
it.
really focused on company purpose, especially when you get in the healthcare space and all that. Well, we're saving lives, and a company purpose is critical. Don't get me wrong. But what I'm finding with leaders is they have either lost connection with or never spent time developing a personal purpose. So to me, it's number one. It's foundational for every one of us as human beings, because that is your why. Like Mark Twain said, the best thing, the two most important days of your life are the day you were born and the day you figured out why. And I love he knew this long ago. But when you become a leader, you're focused on the company goal and what you have to get done, or just like they're juggling everything. They're trying to figure out things at home. I just talked to a CEO yesterday. He's on a plane all the time. He's not seeing his kids and his wife as much, and he's sacrificing a bit in the physical well-being because he just doesn't have the time. So the idea is it's burnout, but due to a lack of, I think, number one, purpose, which helps you with the decision making. It helps you with judgment. So you tend to get to these higher level of roles just as an athlete. When you things start to give that don't feel like the focus of what has to happen, when actually those things that start to give are most critical. So to address that burnout and feeling overwhelmed is get yourself connected to your purpose, your personal purpose. And then how does that come? How do you activate that? What serves it? It helps you with decision making in terms of how you spend your time. It helps you with decision making in terms of a judgment you make about a decision with a colleague or company, et cetera. But well-being, then, I would say is a big component of that, because they're sacrificing things like sleep and this whole badge of honor of I can get by with 4 or 5 hours of sleep. You can, maybe for a while, but it will catch up on you. So that's the biggest component is burnout. And I think, physical, emotional well-being, confidence and imposter syndrome is another one that I see a lot. And there is you need to create this set of questions and vetting when you're feeling imposter syndrome, whether you're extremely nervous about this meeting or something coming up with the board or a challenge, and there's a little bit of catastrophizing of I might lose my job, because we don't have this job security we had anymore. It doesn't matter if you're a CEO, you can be out like that, right? So part of it is creating this response, personal, again, coaching that private voice. What evidence do I have? Or, I won't have a job anymore. And then what's going to happen to my family? So kind of challenging your thinking is a big piece. And then I'd say another area is just this leading through uncertainty is you need to expect the unexpected, and you need to learn how to shift and be agile. And that really is tied in with the confidence piece. Confidence in, I don't have all the answers, but I got to this role in this position somehow for a reason. I don't think I fooled people my entire life, and I'll figure it out, but I need to do it through this kind of toolkit and how I address the challenges when they come. Did that answer it for you?
That's a wonderful answer. And you said quite a bit of things there. So I want to break them down a little bit. So imposter syndrome, I'm sure quite a few people listening to this right now know exactly what that means. I've experienced that. I'll give you a perfect example of what I think Caren's talking about. But essentially, imposter syndrome is the idea that you're not really who everybody thinks you are. You're not quite as good as everybody thinks you are. And so I've been a board certified trial lawyer for almost 25 years. I've tried a ton of cases. I've given a bunch of speeches in public. And before every speech, still today, in my brain, I'm going, I don't know if I'm going to be any good at this. Are the words going to physically come out of my mouth? Am I going to sweat so much? It's like in my mind goes into this, you're just a big phony. Like nobody, you're not who you make yourself out to be. So I experienced that myself still today, and it's gotten a little bit better because I've had some coaching and done some other things. But what you said at the beginning of your answer, I think is so important, Caren, and that's this idea of purpose. I have this saying that I don't know if I made this up or not, but the opposite of happiness is not sadness. It's boredom. It's not having anything to do. It's not having a purpose to get up in the morning. It's not having something that you get excited about. And so I think the most important thing people can do, maybe, especially as they start getting a little bit older, is find something that gets them excited. It doesn't matter what it is, but find something that you can really sink your teeth into. And one of the things I've been kind of working on lately, Caren, is like, what kind of things could that be? And one of the things I tell my kids is getting the most out of whatever God-given talents you have, like getting the most out of what you've been given, whatever that is a pretty good purpose. I don't know if that's the purpose, but that's a pretty good purpose. Another good purpose is figuring out not what you can do for yourself, but how you can help other people. Like, there's something about helping other people that gives you energy. Like it's like you go buy yourself all the cars and all the jewelry and all the fancy houses you want. It's not going to give you any additional energy. You go out and you help 10 people accomplish something, you're going to feel so much better. You're going to have more energy. You're going to be excited. So the purpose thing, I think, is absolutely fundamental. And then the thing I love about when I ask a question about, what are the 2 or 3 things you tell people, you started with that. And I think that's just fundamental. Like, you have to start with the mindset before you get into all the particulars and the tactics and the strategies. Like, you got to sit down and say, this is what I want my life to look like. This is what I want my business to look like. And here's why. And then you talk about the strategies to actually execute that plan. So that is absolutely incredible, Caren. I really like that. Tell people real quick before I let you go. We've been going for about half an hour. Before I let you go, tell people, like, I have a lot of people that listen to this podcast that are either the boss, or they've started a company, or they're in charge of a group of people, or they're like military officers. What kind of people? So your company is Evolve Leadership. If anybody's looking for it online, it's evolveleadership.com. And that's EVOLVE, evolve like evolution. What kind of people, what kind of people would be best served by the coaching that you provide, you and your company provide? Like, what's your avatar client, in other words?
I mean, the people we primarily work with are leaders. I'll go back to what I said before: leaders who are motivated and want coaching, not those who don't, or who feel like it's imposed on them. But we work with the C-suite, both startup companies, smaller companies, as well as Fortune 50 companies. And we do leadership team training also, and we do training that cascades down into the organization. But we find that when we work and start with the leaders and they get it, and then it cascades better and they change their behavior. Because your leaders are your role models, and you can tell your employees to invest in their well-being, and you can tell them whatever you want, but if you're not doing it yourself, you're not going to do it. You create that culture. And just one thing, if I could, on the purpose piece, because I think it's so important. If there's only one thing you do in your life, it is focus on your purpose. So I love what you said about it, how it's, it's so foundational and critical. But a few things, the other thing you said is it should be about someone else. So I think if people are starting to say, okay, how do I do that? One is, some questions you can just ask yourself is, why am I here? What must I accomplish a life of success? And what impact do I want to have on others? So not to be morbid. And one way to do that is to think about your funeral and how you want people to talk about you. And it's not going to be what you achieved at work or anywhere else. But the other thing is, I think, is they're trying to come up with a purpose. And you said, talk to my kids about their gifts that they were given, et cetera. So it is your gifts, but I think it's also marrying your gifts with your passion, because you could be, have this tremendous gift, but it doesn't excite you. So I would marry that with what excites them, their passion. That's going to make it sustainable. But the other piece is your purpose should be yours. Don't let it be something that you think sounds good or, looks beautiful on a piece of paper that someone else defined for you. It should be your personal purpose, what matters to you, because you get one shot, right? It's in one life. And then it should transcend yourself, exactly what you said. It should be about others to be sustainable, but it shouldn't sacrifice yourself. So transcend yourself, but don't sacrifice yourself in the process where you're burning out because you're executing on it. And then third, I would say build some metrics around it, some measurements. So how do you know you're there? Because I could say I was a single parent for 15 years. Say I want to be the best mom in the world, but what does that mean? I do everything for my kids. I get them into the right colleges, or I'm more particular in saying I want to raise strong, caring, and independent daughters, show them they can overcome and achieve anything because they went through a tough life with their dad, and then maintain a meaningful connection with them as adults because they now live in different places. So you want to be able to look at your purpose at the end of the day and say, where did I score well on this and where did I fall short, so that you're not fooling yourself and you're actually creating this living, breathing thing that will continue to change over time as your life changes. So
you and I have some things in common. So my mother died when I was 10, and my dad, she died of breast cancer. It was misdiagnosed and she was given 6 months to live. She ended up living 5 years, but I had a brother who's 2 years younger than me, and my dad was lieutenant colonel in the Air Force at the time. And he basically revamped his entire career to be about raising me and my brother, but he also worked full time. I mean, it wasn't like he quit his job and just sat around and helicopter parented the whole time, but a lot of similarities there. And, the thing you just said about the funeral, I first read about that idea, I think, in Stephen Covey's book back in the 90s, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. But the idea is, imagine your funeral. What would you want people to say to eulogize you? And I can tell you that what nobody will ever say is, man, you remember Brian Beckham? He had that $10 million house and he bought 7 Lamborghinis for himself. What a great guy. He did look at all this stuff he bought for himself. No, that nobody's going to ever say that. Just to say that sounds preposterous. What they're going to say is, you remember that Brian Beckham guy? Man, he gave me a piece of advice when I was really down, and I will never forget that for the rest of my life. Like, that's what people remember. That's what people admire. It's not how big your house or how fast your car or how good looking you are. It's what you've done to help other people. And by the way, I don't want to act like this has been my driving idea for my entire life. I was very, very selfish until I was into my mid 40s. Like, I thought this whole thing was about what I can do for myself. And it's just been recently that I've realized that it's not about what you can do for yourself. It's about what you can do for other people.
So well said. And you're doing it every day. And to be living into your purpose is such a gift to have figured that out instead of going to the end of your life. And I think, that's the key thing. When we've done that, we've learned how to how to come home, how to finish our lives. So thank you for sharing that. And it sounds like your dad was a great role model, and
Yeah. Still
every,
is. Matter of fact, I'll tell you a funny story real quick. So, like I said, I turned 50 yesterday. My dad mailed me a letter, said, "Don't open this till your 50th birthday." I opened it last night and it said, "You're not going to remember this, but when I turned 50, you gave me a letter." I was a teenager at the time. He said it was one of the best things he ever got in his life. And I don't even remember this, by the way. I don't remember what I said. I don't remember giving my dad a letter, but he goes, "Now it's my turn to do this for you." And he wrote me this letter. It's going to make me cry if I keep talking about it. But it was like, you did this for me when I turned 50, and now I'm doing this for you when you're turning 50. So, that, and I showed it to my wife and daughter last night. They literally started crying. But anyway, that's the kind of thing that's meaningful. It's not, like I said, how much money you make, how many awards you win. Not that there's anything wrong with getting awards or making money. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that can't be your entire purpose in life, or you're going to end up being unhappy, I think. So Caren, what you're doing is wonderful. You're literally teaching the leaders of today and tomorrow, which are the people that I feature on my show. How do people that are interested in finding more about your services, where can they find you on the internet and other various places?
they can go to evolveleadership.com, which you mentioned before. They can certainly reach out to me on LinkedIn. So happy to
Perfect.
connect with anyone.
Perfect. Well, again, I kept you a little bit longer than I told you I was going to keep you, but I really, really appreciate your time, and I just want to say what you're doing is wonderful. You're one of these people. I have like a little heuristic that I use. There are people that add to the positivity and the goodness of the world, and there are people that take away from it. You're 100% the type of person that is adding good things to the world. So thank you for that, and thank you for who you are.
Well, you've made my day. Thank you. This has been really enjoyable. And thanks for everything you do for everyone else.
See you later.